Usually, yeah, they were very, they were always good children, and we'd take them downtown and shopping with us, and people would stop us off the streets, and they'd say how cute they were and so well-behaved children. We could take them out to a restaurant. We always promised them that if they were good children, that one week they could take their choice, and it would be every Friday, and we'd take them out to a restaurant for dinner, and they could pick a theater that they'd like to go to, and we would always get there before 6 o'clock, and they enjoyed that and looked forward to it every week. And as they grew up, why, they were always good. We very seldom had to spank them. I don't think Dad ever spanked any. Well, I think you did that one time when Bud, when he was little. He was about 2.5, 3, must have been about 3 years old. And how he got up and got matches and gathered paper and was just about ready to start lighting with the matches and underneath the car. And I think that was when his dad spanked him, and it was a good thing that his dad's cousin Tommy came and seen it. Was on a Saturday morning, and otherwise that was a miracle in itself, because he wouldn't have been there, and we wouldn't have had a son, you know. And he come in, he said, Uncle Bud, he said, do you know what your son's doing? We said, no. And we went out there, and Dad, well, Ray went out to him, and he told him not to do it. And then he took him, and I think you paddled him a little bit.
Yes.
But it wasn't that he cried or anything like that I could remember.
No, our children were fairly.
They were well behaved.
Just by the spoken word and by our own actions and by how we behaved, I guess they very seldom needed any too much of a correction.
They were well-mannered children, because we had a lot of friends, and we'd take them over there, and they always remarked, oh, I wish our children were like yours. And especially, I never will forget when I used to take them to church every Sunday, and they'd sit in they went to Sunday school first, and then I went to Bible class while they were in Sunday school. And then I'd go up to church, and the people at Bethlehem Lutheran Church, where our daughter Bonnie Lou and her husband and the children, their children still went there until they were married. Now they're scattered. And people would remark how well behaved after sitting in the Sunday school and sitting an hour in the church. And another thing that I remember, when we had to move away, and when Ray went in business up in Cleveland, and our grandson Ron went to our church up there, and you were Ronald was about 6 years old, and we brought toys to church and gave you some things and to scribble on and play with. And the minister that we had a children's program, but you didn't want to go up to the altar and listen to the children's program, and we thought, oh boy, you won't be listening to it. And when you were had your confirmation, Ronald belonged to the Luther League, and here you had brought that sermon that minister had preached that morning, and you had given it to the Luther Leagues of your class. And we were all amazed when you wrote that out. And I went back to our church and I said to our pastor, his name was Pastor Hesterman, and I said, do you remember that sermon that you gave to the children when that Sunday about painting the house and the story going along with it? And he says, I sure do. He says, I use that quite a bit. I said, well, our grandson was 6 years old, 7 at the most, and I said, you went and brought that up in your Luther League. And he says, well, at least I know someone was listening. And we never got over that, because, you know, to think, it just shows you that children have ears and listen and remember when parents don't realize that they are listening.
Yeah. Getting back to the behavior of our children, I think it was your grandma, Martha, here, that our philosophy or our method was this: if you promise the child something, if we promised it, it was done. If we said yes, we meant yes. If we said no, we meant no, and it was no. And I believe that's one of the better ways of teaching a child. In other words, you can't say no and then
not mean it.
Or the two parents have got to agree too, in other words, to this. In other words, we both gone through the years seem to have both agreeable that which was right and that which was wrong. And that's the way we try to teach our children. And like she insists on, mostly Martha, she said, no, we said we're going to do this, or we're going to take them there, or we're going to give them this or that. But if we said no, well, that was it. And they down through the years, that's how they were raised, and that's the way they were taught. After they got to a certain age, then, like in high school and so forth, well, we told them, we can't be with you every hour of the day. What happens to you is on your shoulders. We put them right on the shoulder. We want you to behave and take care of yourself. And if anything goes wrong, come home and tell us about it. But that was our philosophy.
Always ask us first, and we're there for any kind of advice of any kind, rather than find it out through somebody else. And they seem to want to do that. And just as we told them to, is choosing their friends. We aren't with them all the time. We used to have cookouts at the end of the year, their school year. We always had cookouts for them, and they could invite any of their classmates and the teachers if they wanted, and they would always have that. And they seemed to have fun and always look forward to it. And but we said we could never be with them all the time, because different parents had asked me, well, why don't your son go with my son? And like our daughter's mother, their friends, her friends would say, why don't your daughter go with my daughter and do this? And so one time I asked both Bonnie and Buddy, and Bonnie said, well, Mother, you don't know them like I know them, and what they are doing, I don't care to do it. And I says, all right, from now on, you choose your friends. You know them, but always feel free to bring them to the house. And that's the same way with our son, Buddy. When he would, the parents would ask me, and I'd say, I told the one woman, Mrs. Caswell, I said, he don't care what your son is doing, and we always left it up to them to choose their friends.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And they did that throughout their life. And I think that's the best policy you can do, but always be there for them.
How close to the way you raise Bonnie and Buddy were you raised?
Oh, I was raised very, very strict. The only thing we had to help at home, the only thing my mother never left us cook. We could never do any cooking on our own because her stove was her palace and her thing. The only thing I could remember when I was growing up, after 10, 11 years, I had to learn. I pared potatoes. I could help prepare the meal. I had to, on Saturday mornings, she always baked 5 to 6 pies, peel the apples, never make a pie crust. She always had to make the pie crust, but we had to peel the apples, pare them, and have them ready, and that's all. And then, but my mother was the overseer. She corrected all of us girls, and my dad took care of my 3 brothers. He was that, but we were raised very, very strict. We had to get up in the mornings. We got up in the mornings. We had to be washed. Our hair had to be combed. We could not come to the table with that. Then we had our prayer if the family was together. If not, we had to say our own prayers. And we could never sit down at the table unless we were neat and clean.
So you were closer to your mother then, and you spent more time with your mother than your father?
No, I was closer to my father, and I were closer than my mother.
Were you?
My mother was strict, and no, I didn't actually. They never put their arms. I don't ever remember my mother ever putting her arms around me, or never. We never kissed. We never kissed goodnight. We said goodnight. Be sure and say your prayers. Never came there to hear us say our prayers. And like I say, I missed that until I married Ray here, my husband. And his family was more lovable than my family. His mother and dad always hugged and kissed him. And that's, I think, where I learned really more of being lovable than I did my own family. Because they seemed to be distant, even though they went to church and learned all stuff like that, loved one another, but never showed it. Never. My family never showed the love. I only had one sister, and she was 10 years older than I was. And she was the only one that showed more attention to me than my own mother and father.
Yeah, how many brothers and sisters did you have?
I had, there was 7 of us in the family, so I had 3 sisters and 3 brothers. Mm. And then we had 2 girls before, excuse me, my other 2 sisters. So my mother had 11 children. But like I say, I didn't know the other 2.
You didn't know them?
No, I never seen them.
Well, I think part of your story here is the fact that they both came from Germany. Your mom and dad came from Germany, and Germans, as a rule, were very strict, and they were very industrious, very saving, and having a large family like you did, your family was, I think that actually that had a tendency to, well, in other words, back in them days they didn't have all the labor-saving devices and appliances that they got today. And I believe that when you have a big family like that, where they had many, many things to do and took up their time, and probably that's why they didn't give the loving that they normally would, you know.
But we never had to want for anything.
No.
I was better off financially
Sure.
than You were actually.
True, yes.
We had all good food, always good. And we used to have butter when other people never even thought of having butter.
That's what I mean, in other words.
And
they
yeah,
tended
we
to-
always ate good. My dad worked very hard.
What did he do?
He was in what they call a, gee, I forget the name of the factory that he worked for,
Some lumber.
but it was a lumber company, yeah. And National Supply. It was a National Supply. It used to be off of Monroe Street there. And it was, he did a lot of sawing and making things. I don't know what they actually made there, produced. But he only lived to be 62. My mother only lived to be 62. But like I say, they, pardon me, worked awful hard. But still, they were taught, and you'd have thought there'd have been, it's not that they didn't love us, I suppose,
I
but
think in the end,
they never, well, we know my mother loved us because,
they took good care of us.
yeah,
And taught
When-
you good.
yeah, when Bonnie was born, our daughter, and she showed more love and attention to her, and this was a way of me showing, or her showing to me, that she wished she could have did that, you know.
Back in them days, the parents were busy.
Mhm.
Hand, they had to wash clothes by hand and everything like that. In other words, the average husband, like your father, probably worked 12 hours a day.
That's
10,
right.
10
He did.
maybe at least. And when they come home, they're tired and so forth. So it makes a big difference. Anyhow,
And your family was a little bit different than that, and
yes, our family was
so it was big nevertheless, and you had
was
nine
rather
sisters.
big, but like I say, as children, there was no favorites. All of us children were treated alike all down through the years and all our lives. We was all loved by our mother and father, and Martha there said we'd kiss each other goodnight every night. And we didn't have much financially, but we were taught right from wrong, and
You had the love.
we had to love. And I think, like the old saying goes, it isn't
How much you have,
how much you have, it's
what you do with
what
it.
you do with it. And how should I say here in other words? Oh, I can't come up with it.
And Grandpa, where did he work? Great Grandpa?
Oh,
Your dad?
he was a machinist, what they call a machinist. That's tool and die making, in other words, working with metal and sheet metal and making things out of metal and so forth. He never, he worked quite a few places, in other words. I'm trying to think the last place he worked, I can't remember the name of it, but they were making dies to a big stamping press would stamp out a whole fender or of an automobile. In other words, back in them days, they made them different than they do in the modern day times now. In other words, everything had to be very accurate. And I forget the name of the firm he worked for. It was from Toledo, Ohio.
So how did you get into the bindery business then? What sparked your interest in that?
Well, my mother's niece lived in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and unbeknownst to me, of course, and unbeknownst to our family, there was a bookbinder, needed a person that was experienced in operating what was known as a book sewing machine. And he started a bindery in Toledo, Ohio, called a Kitchell's Bindery, and he sent word, he belonged to the union or something like that anyhow, he sent word to the local union there in Fort Wayne, Indiana, probably sent it to other cities and towns. He was searching for a person that knew how to operate a book sewing machine. And my mother's niece seen that ad, and she answered it and got the job, and she stayed at our home with her little son. And she came home one day, I was only about 16 years old, she came home one day, and she said, asked me if I wanted to go to work for this Kitchell's Bindery. I said, well, I don't know anything about the job. She said, well, that's the idea. She says, you'll possibly learn the trade, and you need somebody to do things around the shop and make deliveries and so forth. So that's how I started in the
Bindery.
in the bookbinding. Bookbinding is a finishing, it's called the finishing end of the printing trades. In other words, a printer prints a sheet, and then bookbinder makes it up into booklets or statements or ruled ledger sheets or numerous other things. And we also bound books for the big, huge ledger books for the courthouse. And then we had, after, in due time, we had machines that would take a flat sheet of paper and fold it up into pamphlets or advertising, that which you get in the mail a lot of times with your statement nowadays.
What kind of things did you do before you went to work then? As a child, how did you entertain yourself? I mean, what different activities did you do?
Entertain ourselves?
Mm-hmm.
You mean when I was about 16 years old?
Oh, any time before that too. I mean, from 10 years old, 12?
Oh, well, in other words, some of the kids, young kids in the neighborhood have what we call ukuleles. It's a 4-string instrument. And we used to get together and play those once in a while and sing a little bit. Outside that way, we didn't do in other words,
You climbed trees with your boyfriends?
oh, well, naturally.
With Harold
this is a normal thing, yeah. But it was, at that time in life, we weren't going to dances or anything like that because we were quite young.
Mm-hmm.
You played marbles, you used to say.
Oh, yeah, sure, played marbles and so forth.
But you didn't have radio to listen to or television to watch, or?
No, all we had in them days was a grind. You had to wind it by hand, a graphophone, it was called a graphophone, or
Victrola.
Victrola, and you put a record on it, and it made pretty good music and sounds, and that was our entertainment there, as far as that part was concerned. Then, of course, we had a real old-fashioned pump organ that my sister learned to play. I don't know when my mom and dad bought that, but she learned to play that, and we'd sing along with what she played. That was a little entertainment. But